They said I was nothing but a burden, a quiet shadow clinging to my husband's wealth. My mother-in-law whispered venom, urging him to leave me before I dragged him down. I smiled in silence, letting their scorn pierce me like glass shards. What they never saw were the nights I stayed awake, not crying, but calculating. Behind their closed doors of judgment, I was building a secret empire. And the day my $5 million investment matured, their world cracked. Suddenly, the question wasn't whether my husband would leave me, it was whether his family could ever look me in the eye again. The first year of marriage looked perfect from the outside. At family gatherings, I wore the smile of a woman who had it all: a beautiful home, a devoted husband, and a seat at a table where everyone else measured worth in possessions and power. They saw me as quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of wife who would nod politely and let others take the stage. It was easier that way. I learned quickly that silence kept the peace. Every Sunday, I slipped into the role of the agreeable daughter-in-law, pouring coffee, laughing on cue, listening as stories were told about who bought which property, who closed the better deal. They thought I was impressed. They mistook my silence for ignorance. But behind the mask, I was measuring something different. How much disdain lingered in each glance, how every compliment toward me ended with a sharp edge of condescension. The most striking symbol of it all rested on my finger. My wedding band, flawless and heavy, caught the light whenever I reached for a glass. To others, it gleamed like proof of my fortune, a prize for marrying well. To me, it pressed against my skin like a chain. It didn't represent love. It represented ownership. Every time my mother-in-law's eyes flicked toward it, I felt the weight tighten, as though she believed the ring alone justified my place. One evening, while I cleared plates from the dinner table, I passed by the hallway just in time to hear the muffled voices I wasn't meant to hear. My mother-in-law's tone was low, poisonous. "She's nothing but dead weight. One day you'll thank me when you finally cut her loose. My son deserves better than a woman who brings nothing." My sister-in-law chuckled, a sharp sound. "She plays house well, but we both know she doesn't belong." The words seared into me. I stood frozen, the tray trembling in my hands. That was when I understood. It wasn't careless gossip, it was a plan. They were working together, slowly, deliberately, to erode my place in the family. The worst wound came later. Not from them, but from the man I loved. That night, I watched my husband sit in silence, staring at his phone, his jaw tight. He didn't repeat their words, but the distance in his eyes told me he had heard them too. And for the first time, I saw doubt etched on his face. Doubt not about them, but about me. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to pour out the truth of who I was and what I carried within me. Instead, I swallowed the words. Tears might have softened him, but tears would also confirm what they already believed, that I was fragile, dependent, unworthy. So I did the only thing that felt powerful in that moment. I stayed silent. Silence is not weakness. Silence is a weapon that sharpens in the dark. They thought I was retreating, that I was folding under their contempt. In reality, every quiet moment gave me more clarity. Every insult carved the outline of the woman I had to become. Not the woman they imagined, but the woman I already was. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I slipped into my study. The house was still, the only light spilling from the thin screen in front of me. My reflection flickered against the glow, half shadow, half fire. I opened the encrypted folder only I knew existed. Rows of numbers stretched across the screen, charts rising and falling like waves. Every line told the story they didn't know, years of careful decisions, patient risks, and silent wins. The cursor blinked at me, a heartbeat on the edge of revelation. I leaned closer, eyes scanning the portfolio that had grown beyond anyone's guess. The numbers stood bold, undeniable, more powerful than all their sneers combined. Millions, quietly accumulated, quietly guarded, waiting for the right moment. As the house breathed in its sleep, I let my hand rest on the keyboard, steady and unshaken. Let them think I was powerless. Let them whisper behind closed doors. The truth was alive in front of me, shining from the screen. And I knew then, with absolute certainty, their war against me had already been lost. In the weeks that followed, I allowed myself to become exactly what they wanted me to be, the quiet wife who faded into the background, the woman too timid to question the authority of her husband's family. My mother-in-law tightened the purse strings, reminding me each time I bought something that it was her son's money. She restricted household expenses, cut down the small allowances I once received, and with each restriction, she believed she was putting me in my place. I played along. I nodded when she chastised me for spending too much on groceries. I apologized when she accused me of wasting electricity by reading late into the night. I even let her reduce my access to joint accounts, a move she celebrated with a smirk, certain that she had stripped me of independence. What she didn't realize was that her control was limited to the world she could see, and the world she couldn't see was mine. To the outside, I looked cornered, stripped of choice, forced to ask permission for every decision. But within me, a strange power grew. Each insult was fuel. Each restriction was proof that my mask was working. They saw weakness. I saw strategy. One night, after a particularly humiliating dinner where my sister-in-law laughed about how Emily wouldn't survive a week without our name, I excused myself quietly and slipped upstairs. I opened my laptop, logged into a secure platform, and stared at the screen. My finger hovered over the mouse, steady and deliberate. The portfolio blinked alive, waiting for me to decide its next move. A calm smile tugged at my lips as I clicked confirm. The trade was executed. Hundreds of thousands of dollars redirected into a company whose growth I had tracked for months. A company that, in silence, would become the dagger I never needed to wield aloud. The truth was, I hadn't stumbled into this life by chance. Long before I was their daughter-in-law, I was a name whispered in conference rooms in New York. I had walked the glass halls of Wall Street, survived the ruthless pace of markets, endured the sharp tongues of men who thought I was too young, too female, too fragile to last. And yet, I had lasted. I had built models, predicted turns, and earned respect that came only when numbers proved you right. But success came at a cost. The sleepless nights, the endless calculations, the isolation of being the only woman in the room, it all chipped at me until I wanted something more than numbers. I wanted a family. I thought leaving that world behind meant leaving power behind. I was wrong. One evening, as I pored over charts in silence, a message pinged across my encrypted line. The name that appeared made me pause. Marcus, my mentor, the man who once told me, "Quiet power lasts longer than loud victories." He had watched me walk away years ago with disappointment in his eyes. Now, his message was simple. "I hear you're still playing the game. Need a partner?" Our conversations picked up like they had never ended. He knew my patterns, understood my calculations, and when I showed him my current strategies, he didn't question. He sharpened them. With his quiet guidance, my small empire grew faster, stronger, more certain. Then came the twist of fate, the cruel poetry that made me believe destiny had a sense of humor. The company I chose for my largest stake was the very one my mother-in-law had once gambled on and lost. Her story of failure had become a family legend, how she had trusted the wrong people, how she had been humiliated by the market. She used it as proof that women had no place in business, no instinct for money, and now, in silence, I was turning her greatest wound into my greatest weapon. Weeks turned into months, each investment ripening like fruit. Then, late one night, as rain tapped against the windows, an email arrived. My breath caught as I opened it. A notification from the bank. The numbers glowed back at me, undeniable and absolute. Total assets, $5,000. The room seemed to hold its breath with me. My reflection in the screen looked sharper, harder, more certain than the woman my in-laws thought they controlled. They had no idea. They still believed I was powerless, cornered, defeated, and yet here I was, holding a fortune they couldn't even imagine, forged not through their name, but through my own relentless, quiet hands. I leaned back in my chair, the faintest smile curving my lips. The war they thought they were winning had never been theirs to fight. It was mine all along. The act became second nature. I let myself move through the house like a shadow, polite, agreeable, the perfect image of the woman they believed I was, fragile, unambitious, utterly dependent. At family dinners, I laughed at their jokes, served the wine, and let them talk over me as though my voice was unnecessary. They saw weakness. What they didn't see were the late nights, the hidden notebooks slipped between novels on the bookshelf, the coded documents stored under layers of encryption. Every night when the house went quiet, I retreated to my study. I recorded market shifts by hand, charted trends in delicate ink, and tucked the pages into journals disguised as old poetry books. Each number was a whisper of the future I was crafting. They never thought to check. Why would they? In their minds, I was too simple to understand the world they lived in. But cracks began to form. My sister-in-law, sharp-eyed and restless, started watching me more closely. She asked offhand questions that carried too much weight. Why are you always awake so late? What do you even do locked up in that room? I brushed her off with excuses, reading, writing, insomnia. But I saw the suspicion harden in her eyes. Her smirk grew sharper, as though she was waiting for me to trip. The danger thickened one night when I forgot to log out of a shared email account. I had used it only once for a confirmation, certain my husband never checked it. But fate has a cruel way of testing silence. He saw it. The message was short, clinical, impossible to deny. Transaction confirmed, $850,000. Settlement complete. The look on his face when he confronted me was nothing like the man I had married. Anger cut through his voice, edged with betrayal. What else have you been hiding, Emily? What else have you lied about? I wanted to tell him everything, to lay the truth bare, that my silence had been a shield, that my strength had been built not to deceive, but to survive. But the words caught in my throat. His mother's shadow loomed behind him, feeding his doubts, twisting his loyalty. My mother-in-law seized the moment. She spoke with a rehearsed sorrow, dripping poison as if it were compassion. You see now, don't you? She's been using you. I warned you. She's not the woman you thought she was. My sister-in-law nodded eagerly, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Papers appeared faster than I imagined possible. Divorce documents drafted and waiting for his signature, placed before him like the final move in a game I hadn't realized they had been playing from the start. They wanted me erased, stripped of the family name, the home, the dignity I had protected with every ounce of silence. And for the first time, I felt the walls closing in. My carefully drawn lines, my hidden victories, all of it threatened to collapse under the weight of suspicion. The man whose love I once believed unshakable now looked at me as though I were a stranger. I reached rock bottom in the quiet of my room that night. The ring on my finger felt heavier than ever, a reminder of the bond now fracturing under pressure. I stared at the stack of papers they had prepared, my future reduced to signatures and seals. For a brief moment, I wondered if they had won, if silence had betrayed me instead of saving me. But fate does not always bend to their will. The next morning, before the pen could touch paper, the world shifted. News broke across financial outlets, bold and unavoidable. The deal I had nurtured in silence had matured. My portfolio, my quiet empire, stood revealed to the market. Headlines flashed. Unknown investor secures $5 million win in strategic buyout. The name was mine. The victory undeniable. As the word spread, I felt the weight lift, not because they finally knew the truth, but because the silence I had carried had finally spoken for me, and it spoke louder than any accusation they could hurl. The news spread like wildfire. By the time breakfast was served, the story had already found its way into every major financial outlet. My name, once invisible, appeared in bold on headlines that made my in-laws choke on their morning coffee. Quiet investor secures $5 million fortune. Reporters called it a masterstroke, a move only a seasoned strategist could have pulled off. I chose that moment to end my silence. I gathered them all in the living room, the same room where their whispers once cut into me like blades. The documents I had kept hidden now lay neatly stacked on the coffee table, trade receipts, contracts, and proof of every decision I had made. The evidence was undeniable. My mentor, Marcus, joined via video call. His familiar voice filled the space, steady and certain. She's one of the sharpest minds I've ever worked with. Her success is no accident. It's the product of years of skill and discipline. His presence silenced whatever doubt lingered in the room. The weight of his credibility turned my in-laws' scorn into stunned disbelief. I looked at my mother-in-law, whose lips pressed into a thin line. "If I'm a gold digger," I said evenly, "then today I dug up a gold mine for your family. Tell me, does that make me a burden? Or the backbone you never saw coming?" The room froze. My words hung heavy, slicing through the tension that had strangled me for so long. For once, she had no immediate retort. Her silence was the sweetest music I had ever heard. But then my husband's eyes met mine. His conflict was written in every line of his face. He stood between two worlds, the family that raised him and the woman who had just shattered every illusion they had built about her. The silence stretched, unbearable, until he turned away, unable to speak. That hesitation cut deeper than any insult. Days later, the tide began to turn further. The family's carefully polished image began to crack. Rumors spread. Whispers resurfaced about my mother-in-law's own financial failure years ago. It was a story she had buried, one she had spun into a cautionary tale to keep others from trusting women with money. Now, with my success exposed, her past looked less like bad luck and more like incompetence. The truth came out piece by piece. The company she had once invested in and lost everything? It was the very same company I had chosen for my largest stake. The irony was merciless. Where she saw ruin, I saw potential. Where she ran, I endured. My victory was not just financial, it was poetic justice. But I didn't gloat. That would have been too easy. Instead, I let the facts speak. I spoke softly, but my words struck harder than any accusation. "Your story ended in failure," I told her one evening, my tone calm but unyielding. "Mine begins where yours stopped." The difference wasn't luck. It was belief in myself when no one else would. Her authority, once absolute in this house, dissolved with each passing day. The matriarch who ruled with disdain was now reduced to silence, her eyes downcast whenever my name surfaced in the news. The others watched her fall from grace with unease. Even my sister-in-law, once so eager to mock me, grew quiet, her smirk replaced with wary glances. And yet I did not bask in vengeance. My triumph wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming the dignity they tried to strip from me. Success became my mirror, reflecting the truth they refused to see. One night, when the storm of headlines had begun to settle, I sat across from my husband. The documents still lay on the table, but the air between us was heavier than any number on a page. He looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time, not as a dependent wife, but as an equal, or perhaps someone beyond his reach. Without a word, I slid the ring from my finger. The metal no longer felt like a chain. It felt hollow, stripped of its meaning. I placed it gently on the table, the sound echoing louder than any shout could. His eyes widened, stunned, his breath catching, as though the gesture had stolen it from him. For the first time, he realized the choice was no longer his to make. It was mine. Victory tastes different when the world is watching. For weeks, my name filled newspapers, blogs, and television screens. I was celebrated as the quiet investor who outsmarted the market, the wife who turned silence into strength. Reporters lingered outside our gates, eager for a glimpse of the woman they once thought invisible. Strangers sent letters praising my courage, my discipline, my resolve. Yet inside the walls of my home, triumph turned to poison. The same family who once accused me of being a burden now treated me as though I were an intruder who had overstayed her welcome. My mother-in-law avoided me altogether, her silence more venomous than her words had ever been. My sister-in-law no longer sneered, but instead carried a watchful caution, as if measuring my every move. The sharpest change came from the man who once vowed to stand by me. My husband's pride began to wither in the shadow of my success. At dinners, he grew quieter. His shoulders slumped as conversation shifted toward me. Friends no longer praised him for his business acumen. They praised me, and when they did, I saw his jaw tighten, his smile falter. One night, I overheard laughter from the study where he had gathered with his friends. "So, how's it feel living off your wife now?" one of them teased. The others joined in with cruel chuckles. I waited for him to defend me, to defend himself, but he didn't. Instead, he forced a laugh, as though agreement was safer than resistance. That sound broke something in me far deeper than their words ever could. I had climbed to the peak, but the air was thin and bitter. My wealth, my recognition, all the armor I had forged, it seemed to have corroded the very marriage I once fought to protect. I had silenced my enemies, but in the silence that followed, I began to lose the man I loved. One evening, as I watched him from across the table, I saw the emptiness in his eyes. It was not anger, not resentment, but something worse, disbelief that he still had a place beside me. And in that moment, I understood the cruel irony. My victory had cost me the very bond that once gave me strength. That night, lying awake in a bed that suddenly felt too large, I whispered the truth to myself. What is the price of power if love is the first casualty? The answer came sooner than I expected. My mother-in-law resurfaced, not with petty insults, but with a new weapon. She arrived one morning with a man I had never seen before, a lawyer whose polished smile concealed sharper fangs. He greeted me with disarming charm, but his eyes betrayed calculation. Over tea, he spoke of family interests, shared legacies, and financial alignment. His words danced around the truth. He was there to find a way to strip me of what I had built. At first, I dismissed him. I believed my records, my contracts, my independence would shield me, but cracks appeared quickly. Confidential details of my investments surfaced in conversations they should never have known about. When I pressed for answers, silence filled the room like smoke. It was my sister-in-law who betrayed me. She had always been restless, desperate for approval, and it was clear now she had sold me out. Whether it was for money or influence, I couldn't be sure, but she had handed them the keys to my fortress, leaking details of my strategies, exposing vulnerabilities I thought only I knew. The realization cut deeper than any betrayal before. It wasn't just scorn or gossip this time, it was treachery for profit. The pieces fell together. The lawyer wasn't merely an advisor, he was orchestrating a plan with them. A plan to dismantle my holdings, to twist legal loopholes, to position my husband as the rightful claimant and paint me as an untrustworthy spouse who had concealed assets. They wanted not just to belittle me, but to erase me, to strip me of every dollar I had fought to build. I found the proof late one night, hidden among my husband's papers. It was a draft contract, unsigned but damning. It outlined an agreement that would transfer my assets under the guise of family trust management, a tidy phrase masking theft. My husband's name was there, written in ink across the bottom, waiting for his signature. I held the document in my hands, my breath shallow. The lines blurred as the truth struck me. They had never stopped plotting, not even after my victory. My $5 million, the empire I had carved in silence, was not safe. They were prepared to take it, to leave me with nothing but a story of betrayal. For a long time, I stared at the paper, the weight of it pressing down like chains. In that moment, I understood fully the cost of standing tall in a world that never wanted me to rise. Power had won me headlines, applause, and enemies stronger than before, and now it threatened to leave me alone. I folded the contract carefully, my hand steady despite the storm inside me. The battle was far from over, but the rules had changed. They had drawn new lines in the sand, and this time, they weren't content with whispers or insults. This was war, and they meant to take everything. The contract burned in my hands long after I had set it down. It was more than a threat. It was a mirror reflecting the truth I had tried to ignore. Money could not buy loyalty, nor could it mend the fractures love had suffered under pressure. I had won wealth, but I had lost the sanctuary of trust. For days I wandered through the silence of the house, every step echoing in rooms that no longer felt like home. I could fight them, drag every one of them into court, scorch the earth until there was nothing left but ashes. But what then? Even if I won, would I be anything more than the woman who destroyed her husband's family? I stood at a crossroads no balance sheet could calculate. Continue the war, or change the game entirely. The answer came in the form of surrender, not to them, but to something greater. I gathered the papers, the portfolios, the evidence of my fortune, and drafted something new. A family trust that would exist beyond me, beyond them. A legacy immune to greed. I poured every cent of the $5 million into the fund, binding it legally so that not even betrayal could touch it. This wasn't a weapon. It was an inheritance. When I presented it, their faces registered confusion, then disbelief. "You'd give it all away?" my husband asked, his voice caught between awe and suspicion. I looked him in the eye and said, "Yes, because this isn't about me anymore. It never was. It's about what survives us." The final decision, however, was not mine alone. I slid the documents across the table to him, my voice steady. "This is where you choose. You can side with your mother and watch everything I've built become a battlefield. Or you can side with me, and together we make this our legacy. But you cannot have both. So tell me, do you choose the past or the future?" His silence stretched, heavy with years of unspoken loyalty and doubt. I saw the war play out in his eyes, the pull of his mother's voice against the truth he could no longer deny. The room felt like it was holding its breath, and then slowly he reached for the pen. His hand trembled, but his signature carved the future into place. For the first time, he stood not as his mother's son, but as my partner. The fallout was immediate. My mother-in-law erupted in fury, her face pale with disbelief as she realized her hold over him had been broken. She screamed of betrayal, of ungrateful children, of family torn apart. But he stood firm, and for once I didn't have to fight alone. The shift was seismic. I was no longer the silent outsider at their table. I had rewritten my place, not with vengeance, but with vision. They could no longer call me a burden. I had become the foundation upon which their future now rested. Power, I realized, was not about dominance. It was about redefining the story they told about me, and the story I chose to tell about myself. In the weeks that followed, the trust took shape. The money I had once hidden became the seed for scholarships, investments in the younger generation, opportunities that would outlive all of us. Reporters no longer called me just an investor. They called me a reformer, a builder of legacies. And for once, the headlines didn't sting. They felt true. One morning, as the sun crept over the horizon, I walked out into the garden. The air was crisp, the light soft and golden. I thought of every insult, every whisper, every betrayal that had brought me here. I thought of the silence I had carried, not as weakness, but as fire waiting for the right moment. I breathed deeply, and for the first time in years I felt free. Not because I had won, but because I had transcended the game altogether. I had turned their scorn into strength, their betrayal into blueprint. And as I stepped into the light of dawn, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was no longer bound by their gaze, no longer chained by their judgment. I had written my own ending, and it was only the beginning.